It got so bad. I know people talk about these things and like, I know I love painting with some pictures to talk about how different life was. It got so bad during the height of this famine that people went to the prisons, tore the conflicts out of the prisons, and ate them. That was the only source of calories. So, welcome to another episode of WTF History. It is such a joy to have you here. We want to thank you for your tremendous amount of subscriptions. David tells me we're up to 16,000 subscriptions, and every episode is getting over 100,000 views. So, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Let's keep it going, man. Let's hit 20. I want to hit 20.
Yes. And today we're talking about tragedies,
Mm.
times in history when a
Mhm.
lot of people died.
Mhm. Mhm. I like this. I like this. I don't like tragedies, but I like this because it is important for us to remember a lot of these events, Mike. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that a lot of the younger folks in our audience, they forget about a lot of events. Like, you know what, man? I think a lot of people forget about the Challenger shuttle, right? I think they do.
Yes, they do. I'll go a step further. I will say that learning about times in history where humanity had it really rough hopefully gives everybody an appreciation for how good things are now.
Yeah. All right. Look at you, always trying to better me. Whatever. All right. What do you got, Mike?
So I want to talk about what could possibly be the worst period in history to be alive, and I want to talk about why.
Can I try to guess the year first? Because
Go for it.
as those of you in the audience know, we don't talk about these ahead of time.
We don't.
We kind of get like a general feeling of what the issue is. 540.
I love you. I love you, David, because that is my runner up. That's my runner up.
Ah.
Now, 540, there was a prominent historian who I adore who came out and said conclusively that 540 was the worst year in human history.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reason was you had centralized authority collapsing all around the globe. You had
Hmm.
the fall of the Persian Empire, the fall of the Roman Empire, etc. You had massive plagues, the first really documented plague, the plague of Justinian. And you had sweeping changes throughout the world. And it just, what a miserable time to be alive, right? Endless war, all sorts of bad stuff going on. The second time that people often quote, if they're not talking about like World War II or something, but the second time that people often quote is the Black Death. But I am going to talk about a period of time a little bit before the Black Death. We're going to go to the Black Death and we're going to rewind. And I'm going to tell you about some tragedies that occurred in the 1300s and why I believe the 1300s were the worst time to be alive.
Okay.
So people don't really understand that before the Black Death, there was something that really weakened the population in Eurasia and North Africa. And of course, what I'm talking about for those who study history is the Great Famine of the 13 teens. And it started in 1315. 1315 was a really weird year. In 1315, it started to rain in Europe it rains all the time in the winter, but it started to rain in the spring and it did not stop at all during the entire year. And you might say, well, Europe, there's a lot of places where it rains a lot. I've been to England. I know it rains there. It's like Seattle. It always rains. No, I mean, it literally did not stop. In 1315, it was the coldest, wettest year on record in Europe and in Asia and in North Africa.
Was that because there were too many gasoline powered ox carts?
These are the natural fluctuations in climate. So
Oh, okay. I didn't know those existed, but you go ahead.
yes, great Socratic question there. But so when I say it didn't stop raining, I want to tell you that like the 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 grain never ripened. We had a population almost entirely dependent on wheat, barley. It never ripened. It
Mm,
never got enough sun to ripen, so the entire crop was gone. The hay never cured. The hay just molded. It just got
mm,
out there. You have bales of hay to feed the animals. It molded. On top of that, it really gets even deeper than that. Every place, before modern times, how did you preserve food? You know this, David.
Salt?
Salt.
Yeah.
You could not
Damn, I'm
cure.
good.
You could not cure the salt. It rained for so like people know that there's salt pans. You would take salt water, you'd put it out in the sun during the summer, it would evaporate the water, you'd have salt, and You could preserve your meat for the next year. So you had three things with this rain. There was no food, there was no grain, there was no fodder for the animals, and you could not preserve the meats of the animals that died.
Mm.
So within 1 year of catastrophic rains, 95% of the population of Europe was starving.
Yep.
1315. And it really was amazing that this triggered a famine that lasted for at least 3 years. And it sort of dovetailed right into the Black Plague. And it really weakened the constitutions of the people and made them more susceptible to the plague. So the first thing that happened is right away, when it had been raining for a few months, the price of food went up 3 times. So, what little grain that there still was in storehouses, it went up 3 times. So you couldn't buy food if you wanted. There is a well-documented incident where Edward II was traveling through England. He could not go as far as he wanted to because it was pouring. The roads were all messed up. He stopped in a town where they weren't planning on stopping. He could not eat. The King of England could not find food. He could say, I'm going to give you all the gold in my purse. You can take my carriage. He and his entourage could not eat. There was no food, not for the peasants, not for the king. Well documented. That's how bad things were. It got so bad. I know people talk about these things, and I know I love painting with some pictures to talk about how different life was. It got so bad during the height of this famine that people went to the prisons, tore the conflicts out of the prisons, and ate them. That was the only source of calories. You also had a situation where people committed suicide. There's a lot of parents who could not fend for their kids. It was just in their mouth to feed. They would kill themselves. They would put their kids out in the wilderness. This is where you get stories of Hansel and Gretel and all these things that are deeply ingrained in the consciousness. What happened is, when people aren't getting nutrition, is the people were shorter. People had less brain power. People were weakened. You had incidents of pneumonia, tuberculosis, all the communicable diseases skyrocketed. And, you also had a whole bunch of people going to the cities thinking that there would be food there, and there was not food there. And now you had overcrowded cities and people with nowhere to go. And of course, why do I say that the 1300s were the worst time to be alive? Because, well, as soon as these countries got out of this famine situation, a pest arrived on the scene. We all know now, they didn't know then. It was spread by rats. It came on ships. The rats would infect humans. It caused 2 different types of plague. People would die. It's estimated that 200 million people died in Eurasia during the Great Plague. We have lots of written commentaries. This is not some time way back in history. It's not like even like Roman times or Greek times where there's 5 historical sources. There's documents, or there's journals, there's diaries, there's church records. You have writings from towns where they said 75% of the city died. Naples, 75% of the city died. Places like London, they said there were not enough people left to bury the dead. People made walls out of corpses. Just the stories are astounding, just absolutely astounding. And by 1348, the disease had spread so rapidly that half of the population was already gone. So these poor people had lived through a famine in their childhood, and just by a couple decades later, they're everybody lost a loved one or an entire family. The fascinating things, because we try to tie in the historical context, right? The fascinating things is that the famine and the plague actually had profound economic changes. Before this, life was cheap, work was cheap. You could probably pay a peasant, a silver coin to work for an entire month. Now there was no labor. There was nobody left to gather the crops and to take care of the animals. And so all of a sudden you had the emergence of guilds. You had the emergence of unions. You had people saying, well, hold on, we're the last people left to do the work, and you got to pay us. And the fascinating thing is this started the secular change in interest rates that lasted until our present day, until just a couple of years ago. it started in the 1300s, and it started from these horrible, horrible catastrophes. And so, look, what do I have profound about this? I mean, y'all know
Well,
what I'm about to say, right? David, you know what I'm about to say. Ask your question.
well, don't forget we also had the Hundred Years' War going on
Yes.
at the same time, and Europe was maybe the bloodiest war in history, though, current news folks might want you to think differently, but the horrors of the Hundred Years' War cannot be described adequately, how
Yeah.
horrific it was. And that ravaged Europe, just ravaged Europe. That was,
Yeah.
it's essentially France and England going back and forth over some disputed lands, and it was
Yeah.
a very, very long war, right? During a lot of this period. And the another thing, Mike, I know that the 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 cultural and political changes that the famine and the follow-on plague led to was the Great Peasants' Revolt in
Yes.
England.
Yes.
Because the peasants were like, "Hold it a second now, we're more valuable. Like,
Yeah.
we need to get ours." And and they actually, took up arms. And the Great Peasants Revolt, which was around 1381, and that's a really good story. Maybe I should do that one sometime. But yeah, Mike, you were right. This was a horrible time to be alive.
This was a miserable time to be alive. And, I mean, look, my message, I think y'all know this if you've listened to our shows before, if you've watched them. We just say, keep in mind when you cozy up tonight in your heated place and you have a nice big dinner and a bowl of ice cream and you're sitting there on your iPhone, we live in miraculous times. We should all be grateful. I'm not saying we
We
don't
do.
have problems. We all do. All of us have problems, and life is not easy, but times were a lot worse at different periods in history. And, these facts from the 1300s, they're ones that everybody should know is just how bad one freaky year of weather, just an
Yeah.
anomaly, caused these things, these ramifications that lasted at least 100 and possibly, 700 years.
Right. Generations grew up under these conditions.
Yes.
But our internet is off for like 3 hours, and we think it's the worst day on
And
earth.
it's a travesty.
Right?
Travesty.
And you had generations that were eating prisoners.
Yes.
And
What'd you have
so,
for dinner tonight? Well, I had
God,
Jimmy, the burglar.
yeah. Yeah. Oh, no. No, no. I'm an arsonist guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they always got a little crispy outside.
Hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you like and subscribe.
Hey, if you like what you hear, like and subscribe. It really means a lot, and we would love to have you coming back every week. Thank you.